Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. You are going to get, Chris and I are going to talk a little bit today about the results of what we found from our excavations last year and the previous year and a half over at the Overseer's house. The first site that we've excavated in a long time, moving away from the main house and over to a new location. So we're going to talk a little bit about sort of the objective of the project, how we, what our excavation strategy was, and a little bit about what we know about some of the overseers at Montpelier, and particularly the ones we think may have lived at this house. And then some of the results, how our efforts, what they turned up, both in terms of the distribution data, the features that we found, and go a little bit over some of the artifacts as well. This is a little more casual version of a Chris, you want to go back to the first slide real quick of a conference paper that we gave last week, 2 weeks ago at the Mid-Atlantic Archaeology Conference. While Chris and I are presenting here, a lot of the information that you're going to be seeing from this presentation is from a co-authored paper between the two of us, Matt Reeves, Mary Minkoff, Taylor Brown, and Hannah James as well. So Hannah, who in fact put this PowerPoint together that we're going to be cruising through here today. So just want to acknowledge that this is while Chris and I are the ones doing all the talking, like everything in our department, this was a collaborative effort in putting all this information together. So let's go ahead and get started. Chris, you want to go to the first slide? So, like I said, this is actually a part of a larger research project that we're engaged in. The exploring the Overseer's house and trying to identify it is actually one part of a much larger investigation of the entire home farm. So the home farm is the area that you see on the screen. The Overseer's house is what's circled and what we're going to be talking about today, but the home farm is that whole area. So when you drive up to Montpelier and tune in and park your car in the visitor center and look out from the visitor center onto all those green fields, that's an area that we call the home farm. This space is what we believe was really the agricultural heart and center of the Montpelier plantation. So with a number of sites scattered all across the property. Our efforts currently have been, and for this larger research project, is to do archaeological survey across the entire area, starting very broadly with metal detector survey on 20-meter intervals. And then we're going to talk about how we can use that process and start narrowing down using a number of different methods to do very targeted excavations at spots where we believe these sites are located. And that is the process that we used at the Overseer's site, and then it is the process that we're using right now at the blacksmith shop, and that we're going to replicate across this entire area. So our project goals really are to identify where we think these buildings might be located, stop, and move on to the next one. So we didn't actually excavate any archaeological features as part of this project. For example, we just identified the locations of a number of them, and then and said, cool, we think this is where a site is. This is going to give us a basic amount of information so that we can come back. And when we are, particularly as we work with the Montpelier Descendant Committee and other stakeholders to really sort of focus in on asking research questions about the lives of the people who lived at all of these sites. So right now, our efforts are very much just focused on identifying where these sites are. Where are these buildings so that we can do more targeted and ask more detailed research questions and things like that later on. So that's kind of what our big picture plan is of and the first site that we wanted to look at was the overseer's house. We'd actually been doing metal detector survey and done some explorations in the home farm for quite a long time. Our previous National Endowment for the Humanities grant that we received back in 2010 allowed us to do excavations at the tobacco barn quarter and the field slave quarters, which you can see on this photograph. So those have had this process carried out on them already, including doing phase 3 more detailed in-depth excavations as part of a previous research project. And so we, really knew from some of that this was a really rich, archaeologically rich space that's going to, and now that we're moving away from studying up at the main house is really going to give us a really interesting glimpse into how the agricultural component of the plantation at Montpelier worked and operated. Let's see. Chris, I think you can go to the next one. Yeah, so we really did follow we also had a really nice documentary clue which is this this map from 1844 that very conveniently has this nice little sketch of the overseer's house on it in this location that's really right near where both the Madison family cemetery is located, also located near the original homestead. Mount Pleasant is located right near there, which is why the cemetery is located there. So of course, if you squint and look at that image, you'll see this map is geo-referenced on top of the original, or on top of, it's geo-referenced. And while the map makes, the hand-drawn map makes it look like it's a really nice, accurate location of the structure, when you actually put that over a real space, it is not to scale, and it really, from an archaeological standpoint, is only helpful in giving you a general location. So our methodological approach was to really zero in and get a better glimpse of where we're headed with that. So for those of you who are familiar with the way we do a lot of survey at Montpelier, and I know some of you have helped us with metal detector survey in the past and in the present. Tony was just out helping us last week. Hi, Tony. Thank you for your time. We start with a 20-meter gridded survey over as much of the property. We've been doing this over the whole property for decades now, counting hits on a 20-meter grid, and then zeroing in on hot spots to do a 10-foot grid that tightens up our the scale at which we're looking for distributions. So that was the after documentary work. That's the next thing that we do are those 2 rounds of metal detector survey. We're very fortunate we've been able to do ground penetrating radar. Once we have this space kind of tightened up, when we can do ground penetrating radar at these sites and help us zero in a bit more and look for anomalies. We can also then do a much tighter shovel test pit grid than we typically do at than are typically done at archaeological sites. So we do this on a 10-foot grid, which really helps us narrow things down. Hold on just one second. There's a dog going crazy outside. And then once we, and so that 10-foot grid helps us, again, look for artifacts that are not metal, right? Find distributions of other artifacts, such as brick and ceramics and all of those things that don't show up in a metal detector survey. And they also help us look for features. And at such a tight interval of 10 feet, the likelihood of encountering an archaeological feature I wouldn't say incredibly high, but higher than the interval that shovel test pit survey is typically done at, which is going to be anywhere from 25 feet to 50 feet intervals. So we can be more targeted and focused with our shovel test pit survey that helps us yield really great results. And then the next step after shovel tests is looking at all of those different lines of data, all those different survey results, and seeing where we have different pieces overlapping. Like if we have a GPR anomaly that's associated with an archaeological feature and a high concentration of metal objects, or we have a high concentration of, nails and a high concentration of brick, right? These are areas that we may want to start investigating and looking at more carefully with unit excavation in an effort to try to get a feel for where buildings and activity areas might be located. Let's see. So Chris, you can move past this one. All right. So who are the overseers at Montpelier? This is something that actually not a whole lot of research. So in general, the role of the overseer is something that hasn't really received a great deal of attention in the historical or archaeological record. It doesn't mean that they haven't been studied, but it does mean that, and a lot of times when you learn about overseers or the scholars that have done work about overseers, it's primarily been looking at them as, in this position in the middle, in between this hierarchy, plantation hierarchy, where you have the overseer is in between the plantation owner, the enslaver, and the enslaved community on the plantation. So and that tends to be where a lot of the scholarship kind of slows down and stops, is kind of understanding them in this supervisory role, in this position where they sort of have to carry out the will of the enslaver, manage and drive a group of enslaved people, and navigate that position in between these two groups of people. We're very one of the things that I think is often overlooked is wondering about exactly how does working within the institution of slavery actually impact the lives of the people who held these positions? What does their day-to-day life actually look like? How are they navigating this position, building their own identities? All these kinds of interesting questions that a lot of folks researchers haven't delved into and gotten into. There's a very recent publication by that just came out, and of course I'm just blanking on the name of the author of it, but that is really one of the first comprehensive examinations of overseers from the 18th century, comparing overseers in Virginia and Maryland to in the deeper South. So people are starting to move into this exploration, and it's the kind of stuff that we're certainly interested in doing. But the first step, right, is finding where these people actually lived, so that we can start investigating their lives. At Montpelier, the site that we are exploring, we believe, was the home of what Madison refers to as his principal overseer. And this is there's very much a organizational structure that was in place at Montpelier and at most plantations that had overseers, particularly by the 19th century, where you have an overseer who's really kind of serving, is managing a whole number of other overseers. So Montpelier was a 5,000 acre plantation. The documentary record shows the names of a variety of different overseers, but there always seems to be one person who seems to be mentioned the most in the correspondence with James Madison, and seems to be occupying a role that is almost like the overseeing the overseeing. So from 1803 to 1815, that's done by a person named Gideon Gooch. In 1815, that role's taken over by a man named Abram Eddins. And by 1828, it looks like Abram Eddins has moved on. And that period from 1828 to 1844, there's a whole lot going on. And there seems to be a lot of trouble in really having someone occupying that role consistently. That actually jives quite well with a lot of the economic struggle that the plantation is starting to fall under during that period, and a lot of the transitions that are happening during that period. James Madison obviously passes away in 1836. Dolly Madison and her son John Payne Todd are managing and operating the plantation after that, and relocate back to Washington D.C. So there's a lot of kind of managerial chaos going on at that time, and that seems to actually correspond with a kind of a rapid turnover in the principal overseer spot. Montpelier also has, there's also Sawney, who was an enslaved man who was an overseer at Montpelier as well, and operated and managed a tract of land called Sawney's Tract that is not this area of the plantation, and managed that area for decades. So the research about overseers also suggests that there's a diversity of different types of people who come from different backgrounds and have different social, political, and economic statuses that occupy these positions. And we see that at Montpelier. We see that diversity at Montpelier so far. The historical record has suggested that. One of the most interesting parts of that is Abram Eddins, who we've discovered over the past year not only was an overseer at Montpelier and we believe lived here. He shows up on the census as a neighbor of the Madisons, or located very soon after the Madisons in one of the census records, suggesting that he lived in close proximity. He was a landholder, and a slaveholder. He owned 700 acres in Orange County, and he enslaved 16 people as well. So we're seeing, and this is not, it's not necessarily common, but it isn't uncommon either within slaveholders. So, or excuse me, overseers who were slaveholders. So this is so Abram Eddins presents a really unique and interesting character and person to have been occupying this space. And what that also definitely means, or I think we can say confidently, is that the overseer's site is not only a site that was occupied by free white individuals, but was probably also occupied by enslaved African Americans as well. So that when it comes to setting expectations about what types of what types of structures we may be finding at this site, we're not only curious about whether or not we can find the home of the overseer and his family, but also of the people who he may have held in bondage as well. So the historical record is helping us kind of set unique expectations and interesting expectations about what we may be finding and how to interpret and look at the results that we get at the site. Okay, Chris, we can move on to the next piece here. Here's another close-up of the map that I mentioned. We can move past this one as well, but again, it does suggest that there's a building that may have some chimneys and things like that at it. So our first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about our survey methods that get us to unit excavation, and then Chris is going to take over and talk more about the excavation units and what we found in that piece, and then also the artifacts. So you'll get me for yeah, go ahead, Chris.
If everyone can mute their mic, there's like a number of people whose mics are not muted and it's cutting in and affecting audio. We would greatly appreciate it. Yes, and I also found the title of the book Terry mentioned that I can throw in the chat as well.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chris. It's a really wonderful piece of scholarship also. I would highly recommend it. All right. So, the map that you see here is the 20-meter metal detector survey. So this is really the first round of survey that we try and do this across the entire property. So this is a 20-meter grid, counting the historic hits that we find on the within each one of those grids and throwing them on a map. This is as you can see from, could you go back one, Chris?
Oh, yep.
As you can see, if you could move your cursor over the overseer house, that would be great. You can see where we have these red sections is where we have these large concentrations, and we have a nice big red blobs over there by the overseer's house. So so what we do next is then we zero in and do the 10-foot gridded survey over tops of where these are located, and that next slide should show us that bit. So you can again, you can see first in that graphic there, you can see just how much tighter of an interval a 10-foot grid is compared to 20 meters. And then you can see a little bit also in that map just how the that big red blob that was over the overseer's house, how that shrinks dramatically to a much tighter grid and much tighter location of where the red blob is, right? So our going from 20 meter to 10 foot, you go from a really big site and you shrink it down to something that's much tighter and much more manageable. And all without putting in any archaeological excavation units and things like that. So it's a really great use of resources to look at a big space and start to zero down on historic period sites, right? Obviously, we can only deal with sites that, we can only identify sites that have iron as a component, right? So this is a close-up of the 10-foot grid. That red circle over on the right is a well that was identified through some oral history with some of the people who worked at Montpelier during the 80s and 70s and 80s, and then also investigated by some earlier excavations conducted by James Madison University at this area in 1987. So we do have a scattering of excavation units from then. So that is a identified well that is located in that area that we believe is associated with this site. But you can see a really nice big high concentration of iron objects popping up right in this area. All those black dots are the samples that were taken by the metal detecting. So we try to take a sample of 1 to 3 hits per grid, depending on how dense that grid has. This helps us identify, looking for nails and things like that, diagnostic materials that are going to help give us a time frame on the site and maybe help us a little bit with some of the function of the site, right? So everything that's got a little blue halo around it, those are all nails that were identified. And then the ones with the crosses are cut nails. So you can see a really good percentage of cut nails, which means a 19th century site is present in this area. Also a good deal of wrought nails as well, but there's also an 18th century site that's adjacent, the Mount Pleasant site. And we really do see in the South Yard in particular, we saw a good mixture of these two types of nails, even though in 19th century structures. So, all right, let's move on to the next one, Chris. So anyway, we're getting closer, right? We were very fortunate that a colleague of ours, Seth Van Dam, was able to come out. He works at Gray and Pape, a cultural research management firm. Seth has come on a number of our metal detecting expeditions and things like that. He's a wonderful colleague of ours. He came out and conducted ground penetrating radar for us at the site. And again, just able to do that over that tighter area where the metal detecting was really hot. A number of anomalies popped up in the ground penetrating radar. So again, another way for us to take a glimpse into the earth without having to actually put shovels in the ground and give us some good clues. And then we did shovel test pits. These are shovel width, a little bit more than shovel width wide holes that we dig straight into the ground to subsoil or to the top of a feature if we happen to run into one on a 10-foot interval, screen all of the dirt, collect the artifacts, and make maps. That's shovel test pits in a nutshell for you. We did do this all with our new digital paperwork, which was wonderful because the maps generated themselves automatically. So that was great. Here are the completed shovel test pits that we did. This is showing you where we found features. So if it's a blue dot, then we had a feature was identified in the bottom of that shovel test pit. So really a surprisingly high amount. The shovel test plus the GPR survey really indicated that we have a feature-rich archaeological site, which is super exciting. The shovel test also, well, Chris will talk more about Plow Zone and stuff like that later. We also got really great distribution data that show kind of what seem to be kind of two concentrations of stuff. So the first is located on that north end of the site, and the second is on the southern end of the site. And we really put our energies into examining the southern portion of the site. I'd like to particularly draw your attention to the map in the upper right. This is the distribution of brick. We decided that since we were specifically interested in identifying architectural remains, that we wouldn't just count brick, we'd actually weigh it. So we dug our estimate for the archaeologists in the room. We actually carried around little miniature scales and to all of our shovel test pits and weighed the amount of brick that we were pulling out of these STPs. And it gave us this really wonderful distribution. There's a high quantity of brick located in this southeastern portion of this site. And where there is brick, there is usually a building. So when it came to putting in excavation units, that really became one of the areas that we wanted to test. Like I said, unit selection. So you can now see here in this map the GPR overlaid with the shovel test pits, and you can see where it is we decided to put a lot of our excavation units. So a number of spots where we had units and we had positive shovel tests. So Chris, I think you're up now. Is that correct?
I believe so. Yeah, and here's the area of dense concentration of brick overlay with the units we placed in. Let's see. So we split the field, the unit excavation within two phases, I guess. It was all technically phase 2 excavation for the archaeologists in the room. That's just test units really, as a survey method, not like full scale, what we call phase 3 excavation, where we've for sure identified the building and other features that we want to do complete excavation of. So what we did first is based off of the metal detector data. Some of this was for logistical reasons, because we do public programs, we needed to open units, and we had already finished the site, but we hadn't done all the surveying that we planned on doing. So based off the data we had at the time, which was the metal detector data, we decided to place sort of these diagonal transects of units running across the densest area of metal detector hits. It's just sort of a test to see, what that data would give us. And we identified a number of features from that. This map shows all the units we ended up placing between both seasons, but the areas I boxed out in gold or yellow are features that we did identify that season. And I'll get more in depth into those, but there were a number of just yard features. We didn't excavate any of these, so we don't know for sure what every single thing is, but based off some research and other context clues, we have some guesses. But this picture you see here, it may be hard to tell, but it's filled with ash. And then on the north end of site, we hit this large, what appeared to be a large feature, and in this unit, and then also in this unit here from the same season, where they had very similar inclusions. They augured to a pretty nice depth, and had, what was interesting is they correlated, let's see, I don't think that's the slide. Going back, it correlated with some of the other artifact concentrations, notably here. I don't know if you all can see my cursor, but that was interesting. We noticed there was a big spike in bone fragments and stuff like that in this area. All right, let's see here. We knew from the 80s excavations done by JMU that there was plow zone at the site. Plus, they did some, I don't really know what to call it, like plow zone survey, where they knew it was tilled. The land was tilled in the 20th century. So they did a fresh plowing on it and did a pedestrian walkover survey. So we knew it was plowed, but we didn't know to what extent like we didn't know based off the depth of the stratigraphy if it had been plowed down to subsoil, if we may have intact stratigraphy below it. Was there going to be foundations or any features of that sort that would have remained intact? We were a bit excited. You can see from this photo on the right, there was a number of units where we got through plow zone, or what we perceived as getting through plow zone. Again, we didn't complete all the units in the 2018 field season, or 19, time is such a blur. But they had a lot of charred wood, and that increased substantially from what we perceived as the overlying plow zone. Additional excavations in the 2020 field season, we realized
Did Chris's audio just conk out, or is that just me? Okay, Chris, we just lost you there for some reason. Yeah, your audio's out. Nope, still out. It's that Montpelier Wi-Fi. Who knows? Sorry, Chris. I think you want to maybe jump out and jump back in. Or I can just keep rolling. Do you want me to do that? Yeah, we can't hear you, Chris. This wouldn't be a real Zoom presentation if somebody's audio didn't die, right? That's, I think, is one of the requirements of the Zoom presentation. So I should just start planning these in, and then it would be better. Okay, Chris has left the building, and we'll hopefully come back and we'll be able to hear him. While we're waiting for him, are there any questions at all about sort of what I went over? We can fill our time with any questions about the methodology, the survey methodology that we employed. Feel free to.
This is Lou Tolman. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Oh, great. So I might have missed it. I missed the first few minutes, but your methodology where you break up the entire plantation into grids and subgrids and so on seems terrific and very logical, but I never come across it before. Is it in fact unique or super innovative, or is it used widely? Thank you.
So most archaeological just about all archaeology is done on a grid. But the part that is unique for what we do is the use of metal detectors in this kind of 100% gridded fashion. I think it's a tool that archaeologists are starting to employ more often, but it is I think pretty unique to the work that we do at Montpelier. You see metal detectors being used a lot for battlefield identification and stuff like that, but I think we are starting to, over the last decade, have built a really strong case for its utility in finding historic sites, particularly sites you would typically miss, like barns and things like that, where the signature is really just going to be nails. So we've had a lot of success with that. And the other part that is unique is that we work with metal detectorists, people who know how to use these machines and really effective, strong, and have so those are the two parts that I think are pretty different. Most archaeological surveys conducted using shovel test pits as the first tool that you would use, and that's looking at at much larger intervals. So what we do is we save the shovel test pits for when we can actually use them at a tighter interval. And I think we get a lot more utility out of the shovel test pit than as a tool for looking for features, getting these really dense concentrations of artifacts. We're also taking all of our soil chemistry samples out of our shovel test pits. So we're going to have a really wonderful distribution of soil chemistry data that's going to help us look at land use and things like that as well. So that's been, so yeah. So I guess yes and no is kind of the answer to that question. Chris, why don't we see if we can hear you. But I've got another question. Mark is then wondering if when we take the core drill plug samples, what are you looking for? So I think you're talking about the soil cores. These are literally just an inch diameter cores that we're taking, and we just put them in a, so first in the shovel test pits, we put one at the bottom of every shovel test pit just to make sure we don't have a buried surface that's below us, that we're not getting tricked by what we think subsoil is. We throw a soil core in there just to make sure that it's really subsoil. And then when we do it, when we're looking at archaeological features, since we're not fully doing any excavation of these features, we really just kind of want to get a quick gauge as to how deep these might be. You know, and it may be the difference between us realizing something's a full borrow pit, or that something is maybe just a little, you know, just a little divot or something like that. So particularly in the shovel test pits, again, you know, if, you know, sometimes a plow scar, which is just going to be that deep and is a scarring from when the plow came through, you're not going to be able to tell the difference in a shovel test pit if it's that or if it's part of a giant borrow pit, right? And a quick core will tell you that your feature's this deep or that it's that deep, right? And that's a big difference. So that's all we were doing there with those. All right, Chris, are you alive? We can't hear you if you're, man. All right. Sorry about this, y'all. Looks like any other questions?
Come on, Essie. Come on, beautiful girl. Dad,
Somebody's got a dog. Chris, are you trying to call in? Okay.
All right. Can people?
There, Chris.
Oh, there's.
I can hear you now.
Sorry, I was getting a lot of echo because I had the volume on both. All right. Can you hear me? Oh. Okay.
We can hear you, Chris.
Okay. Great. So I apologize about that. I don't know what happened. So let's see here. Basically, I don't know how much you heard, but we were able to identify that the stratigraphy that we thought may have been intact below Plow Zone was concentrated to the areas where we had features. So it was pretty restricted to this area and the unit sort of around here, and then a little bit over here. All those features had charred wood and ash in them, and what we think happened is from the plowing, it scrubbed the upper, tenth or two of feature fill, which caused an effusion of that feature fill outward. So it was present in the plow scars. It was present in the lower 1/10 or so of the plow zone itself. So unfortunately, we, despite our hopes, did not find any intact occupational strata or anything like that below the plow zone, which we weren't necessarily expecting, but wanted to test it. So let's see here. So again, as I mentioned, that in the second phase, or in 2020, when we placed more units, we had identified the edge of what appeared to be a large feature, which also correlated with the GPR, which you can see there's this pink box here, this anomaly. And then from the STP data, also correlated with some spikes in ceramics, nails, as well as bone. And I think bottle glass too, but I did not include that map on this one, I think. in any ways, we had noticed both in unit excavation, a lot of artifacts, SDPs, we had some real distribution data to support it. And then, you know, obviously a GPR anomaly that was substantial. We ended up uncovering more of it that season, not all of it, just to get a sense of its scale. And indeed, you can see the red marks the edges of the feature, and then there's the pink GPR anomaly, and then a nice, pretty cleaning pass shot. And it lines up pretty nicely with the anomaly. Obviously, as we begin to take it down in the future, if we do return to the site, we'll be able to confirm the shape of it and what's in it. At present, based off of its location next to some other features, we are, and I don't know, Terry may have mentioned this, I heard him say borrow pit, but the size of this and the presence of most of the trash on the site being located here, and the proximity to where we think the building, the overseer's house itself is, we're wondering if this is maybe a borrow pit for harvesting clay that would have been used for chinking or daubing a log structure. We didn't end up finding a foundation or anything like that, but we did find a ton of brick, as Terry mentioned, which may have been, there may have just been a chimney, like a hearth base that brick was correlated with. But we did find a lot of daub at the site as well. And at the site we're currently digging now, we're finding a lot of burned clay at the blacksmith shop. So it is possible that this is a borrow pit, and a structure pit like that is often dug right next to the structure, and then usually filled in with trash over time. So also, Terry, if there are like super pressing questions that I should answer, just let me know. So that was the first main area of interest we had for the 2020 field season. The second was investigating the heavy brick concentration that we got from the STP data. And that's in this area circled in blue. And as you can see, there's no real features over here. There's a couple of small features, and the scale of this map doesn't allow them pop up, but there's like a number of very small, like paling size features, like paling fence posts or something like that. We're not sure if they're scaffolding, or we haven't excavated the stuff, so we can't really interpret fully. But it is interesting that we have, you know, this large pit feature here. There's a well right here, which Terry mentioned earlier, and this brick concentration. At present, we are suspecting that maybe we have a chimney fall, which would give a nice spread due to the collapse, and then plowing is going to further the spread of the brick, as well as breaking it up. We didn't find, I don't think we found any brick bats that season. That's whole bricks or half bricks, bricks with three sides. So it was mostly fragments, obviously, from the plowing, but we did have larger fragments in this area as well. But I don't have like charts to show that data for you. Let me close this door. So the third area is sort of nestled in between. It's just south of the large, what we think may be a borrow pit, and just west of the brick concentration. And in 2017, we again, or 2019 years, I'm sorry, we identified the edge of this feature that had ash in it. And then we identified from the STPs more features that we decided to open units around. And we identified 3 in total, very similar features that all had lots of charred wood, ash in them, and also very large sherds of stuff, mortar, which you can kind of see here. So potentially, obviously we don't know. They augured at a decent depth. Without further investigation, we can't tell, but they may be some sort of internal storage pit or other sort of pit that may be internal to the structure. A lot of times storage pits are placed very close to the hearth. And because of the brick spread that we have literally concentrated right here, it would be cool to open some units in this area going forward to investigate that if the plowing hasn't totally destroyed it. But that was very cool to find those features. It's some of the most eye-popping features we have in our soil because, as many of you are familiar, we have red on red on red. So to have these really nice, dark, clear features is kind of unusual for us and was very exciting and made mapping it quite easy. So another odd thing, as I'm sure many of you archaeologists who are chimed in will know, is when you have legacy excavations and you're a grid that might be different, or survey techniques that were different, or it was likely shot in with a total, like an optical total station or a transit, not like GPS grid and total stations. We had to find the old excavation units from the 80s, which proved a bit challenging. We ended up identifying it primarily because of the well and the STPs we had where we hit some modern fill. So we mapped out the sort of attempt at finding a trench that was dug in the early 2000s, and then as well as this 1987 unit where they had excavated a portion of the well, and then we mapped that in because this portion here had not been mapped, this unexcavated portion in the blue area here. So again, it's interesting. The well helps, indicate that maybe this area of the yard needs further research, further excavation, understand how yard usage was going on this side of the structure, if indeed the structure is where we think it may be, and compare that to other places on the yard, sort of suss out workspace and different activities in the future as we collect more data. Let's see here, and pretty drone shot pretty well, but that just shows the full area that we've excavated. Let's see, where am I? Okay, moving into artifacts. We, compared to the blacksmith shop we're doing now, I kind of miss it, but we found a lot of domestic materials, tons of nails, pottery, pretty diverse in date range as well. Interestingly, the nails that we uncovered, despite the metal detector data, it ended up being that we had a pretty even split of cut nails and hand wrought nails, which is to be expected from a site that may have been built early 19th century and existed for a while. It's also in proximity to the blacksmith shop, so wrought nails don't just stop being used after a date of manufacture for cut nails. So they're going to be around and they're going to be used, but it may indicate overlapping assemblages because the site is plowed. It may indicate earlier structures or additions to structures, modifications. So there's still a ton of questions that we can ask from the nails, but a lot of them were burned, so they were a lot prettier, which will make has made cataloging them easier. Mary has been working on cataloging those. I think she's done data entering them.
So I will say just something about our artifacts is the cataloging is still very much in process. Mm-hmm. So when we say we found a lot of these, that's really just kind of our observations from what happened in the field, right? It felt like we found a lot of XYZ because it's not actually cataloged yet. So just wanted to toss that out there.
Yeah, we do rough, thank you, Terry. We do rough like field cataloging, as many do, of just artifact counts on our stratum paperwork. But again, this is all just observational. Another thing that we noticed in the field, and Mary has noticed while cataloging ceramics, is that we have a nice mixture of both 18th century materials or ceramics, as well as 19th century, both early to late, in terms of transferwares and other stoneware vessels. Interestingly, there's a number of transferwares I'm going to go through here that they were only found at one other site on the property, or a group of sites. So the field slave quarters, which are directly across Westgate Road from the overseer's house, is the only location where we have identified some of these ceramics that we're also finding at the overseer's house, which is interesting, that we can begin to ask questions about the local community, about race, class, and a lot of that kind of stuff at some point. in the future. But this shirt here got us excited every time we found a fragment of it. It's called Tea Time, or what collectors call Tea Time. But it's got this really nice purple pinkish pattern on it. And here's a few of the other sherds. I think they all date to the 1830s. They're in the paper somewhere. But yeah, so one thing that's interesting is in the field quarters where we identified this sherd in a different color, or this transferware type in a different color than what we were finding at the overseer's house. So we identified the same pattern, but different colorations, which is interesting. We did, again, just observationally notice there were a number of patterns that had a pink or purple beyond just that transferware, just the tea time pattern at the site. So kind of looking at overall taste and stuff would be interesting at some point to investigate. Small finds also were quite prevalent across the site that can begin to tell us about just the daily habits, dress, lots of things that get us excited, the sort of everyday life of what it meant to construct one's identity, and how you sort of exercise that in relation to other people in your community. So for the overseer, that's other overseers, the Madisons, the enslaved. There's a lot of things we can suss out. There was one day where we found 4 paste gems in a single day, two of which I think were from the same unit. This is just a picture of all of the 6 we did find. And some of them, especially these here, may have likely been part of the same dress or the same adornment item, or a part of a matching set that you would wear. So cufflink, we definitely had a cufflink or collar link, which you can see here centered. It's the same one here. And then this, it's hard to tell. It's placed here too. There was one that had a sort of floral design on it that would have had probably a pressed foil in between its setting, its copper alloy setting, as well as in the paste gem that would have helped that flower pot. My camera is doing wild stuff. I apologize. Another thing that further, research and investigation would be interesting on this one is we found several different small finds or adornment items that had 6-pointed stars. This one in particular has 6 6-pointed stars on it. So we've got 3 different objects here. So this may have had some sort of symbolic meaning to someone. Maybe they were all part of an attempt to create a single, adornment. Situation is not the right word, but it may have factored in the style or worldviews or iconography to an individual here that I think is interesting. We found 3 slate pencils as well as a piece of writing slate that actually had the letter A on it. I couldn't find a picture of that, but we do know that there is possibly education going on or some sort of temporary record keeping that's being done with slate pencils and writing slates here. Those are always very exciting to find. See, we also found 2 projectile points, as well as a number of sherds of Native American pottery. All of it was late woodland and it's like transitional period, which we know that there was activity going on this property, both prior to the Madison's settlement as well as a little bit after. But there's a long history here beyond just the Madison use of the landscape. So in terms of the research potential of the site, it goes beyond just the research project, that there is multiple phases of history here to be discussed. And we always do enjoy all the stuff we're finding. So Terry, do you want to conclude, or is there anything?
Yeah, I think we can wrap up here. Thank you, Chris. Overall, we're really quite pleased with the results that we got out of this field excavation. We're really excited to get back to the site after we've explored the rest of the home farm, because there's just wonderful features, and it's really a site deserving of a full excavation and a full interpretation as well. And one of the kind of interesting parts about starting with the overseer's house out here as we look at this is just very easily seeing how looking at where that building is positioned on that home farm landscape. And that's what the 3D reconstruction, look, Chris, go back one.
All right.
Kind of shows is its relationship as a site of surveillance, right? And its relationship to all these other structures and sites of labor and sites of bondage. And that picture that Chris showed, the next one, right? I think with those reconstructed slave quarters out there, that is from the location of where we think the overseer's house is positioned. So so much more to learn. This is definitely one of those research projects where you're just kind of itching to to ask all these bigger questions, but really excited with where our next steps are going to take us with this project. So I'd love to open this up for questions, and if there's any other questions. See, we've got questions in the chat already. Susan wanted to know about what strat did we find the prehistoric artifacts. We found them in the Plow Zone. Everything came out of the Plow Zone. So so that's where those were located. So they were nice and churned up with all the 18th century, the 19th century, and the 20th century stuff, like everything was at the site. Tony, has pandemic impacted our investigations and cataloging? Absolutely. Absolutely. We weren't able to run a field school last year. We were obviously not able to run many public programs, and the ones we did were at limited capacity. So so that enormously affected the amount of work we were able to get done. It's had a tremendous impact on the lab. Mary is a one-woman show in the lab right now, and has been since really since June or July. So and that also means no volunteers, and we depend enormously on the work of our volunteers who are actually coming back today. For the first time, we're going to have volunteers back at the field lab, or moved the lab out to the field as another COVID precaution. But it's had a tremendous impact on our ability to get cataloging done. Data entry is the thing that we still are going to have to get done. We're still processing artifacts from the overseer's site. So so it's just a huge impact on the work we're able to do. We would probably still, in some ways want to still be out of the overseer's site right now, but we can't run excavations. We haven't been able to run excavations where we have excavation units next to each other, because we can't have staff that close to each other. We can't have participants working in adjoining units together. So it's impacted our ability to do some of the work, and but at the same time, we've pivoted, and now we're hopping around the home farm and able to do this work, discovering, looking for all these other sites, which was always part of the project. So and survey it's on a grid. It's nice and socially distanced. So all the holes are 10 feet apart. So so it's actually built into the methodology. So so yes, it's impacted things. And in some cases, it's pushed us in different directions and allows us to think differently about our methodology and our approach. In other ways, it is just a real challenge, and the lab work is one of those spaces where I think we're really been held back. But not having our volunteer hours account for 1.5 employees. That's how much volunteer time we get, 1.5, and that's people working in the lab doing the lab work. That's not even counting expedition time. So and that's a lot of work that we don't have right now. Well, we do now as of today. So let's see.
There's a question about Plow Zone. There's been a statistic, and back in the 80s and early 90s, there were a lot of statistical analysis done of how much objects move. And it's really not horizontally, they don't move much, maybe like 10 to 15 feet, but they'll move. They generally stay within the same area that they were deposited in. The issue is stuff getting churned vertically. We lose all of the context of its historical deposition or the layer in which it was formed. So we have 21st century stuff mixed up with 18th century stuff. So we lose the fine grain analysis that we can do of saying, oh, we know this is from 1730 and this is from 1734 and then 1802, like that. We have a big loss of date range data. But so we do factor that into our analysis for sure.
Yeah, and the other problem with plowing is everything gets busted up real good. So there was a question earlier in the chat about faunal remains and what kind of species we're seeing in the faunal materials, and we're really not going to get good data on that until we're able to excavate features, because those are the spots that haven't been impacted by the plowing. And so we're going to have faunal materials that are going to be large enough for us to identify species, but most of the faunal material that we found is just busted up and too small and broken because of the plowing. So that's another component of it. Let's see, we've got some other questions in here. Don wanted to know if we've done any work on the enslaved overseers location. That's Sawney's spot. We have not. Not that I know of. I'm not even confident. Tom Chapman might be able to answer this. I'm not even confident if it's within the bounds of the Montpelier property. To be perfectly honest.
Either.
John wanted to know, he said, I thought that when the Madisons moved to the main house, the old house became the overseer's house. Is this site a later overseer's house? Yes, that is correct. So when James Madison Sr. moved and his mother passed away and Mount Pleasant was no longer being lived in by the Madison family, it was either that house or the kitchen, anyway, was converted into an overseer's house. We then have documentation for, I think it's the 1790s, there's a fire and that structure burns, one of the overseer's house burns down. This is what we believe is the house that replaced it. So yes, this is the 19th century principal overseer's house that we're investigating here.
Excavations of Mount Pleasant confirmed that event as well. There was definitely a sealed fire event.
Yeah.
So that's always nice when those things line up for us.
It is. Yep. Let's see. How deep was the plowing? And when was the last known plowing? So Chris, how deep were our units?
It actually
8/10?
It did range. It was usually between 7/10 and a foot, and some of that an overall depth of unit, but some of that has to do with differences in accumulation of topsoil on the site and slope. But yeah, it generally was about 7 to 8/10 in depth, so that's probably like 9 inches. I think an engineer.
Yeah, and then the most recent, you asked about when the most recent plowing, that would have been in the 80s, early 90s, when the archaeologists did the plowing to do a walkover survey. So this is another survey technique where you take a site that's already plowed, plow it again, grid it off, let it rain, and then you do surface collection, because it'll churn up the artifacts that are in that plow zone. You can do surface collection on a grid, collect everything in a grid, and then make distribution maps. So it's another survey technique that people do. So Vic, you want to know what era was the plowing that affects your work? I mean, that one certainly affected it. It looks like that plowing may have gone a little bit deeper than we probably would have liked, and may have disturbed some stuff that's in that was intact. No way for us to really know that for sure. But I think that it's probably, after this site was abandoned, which was probably 1840s, 1850s, after the Madison sold the property, it was probably plowed for most after that in the 19th century and early 20th. So, did we miss any questions? So, any other questions from anyone? I hope this was useful and you learned things. This will be, we are recording this, so we will get this up on the project page for all of these lunch and learns. So there is a repository for all of the lunch and learns that we've been doing over the last year. We're almost coming up on a year of lunch and learns. So a really deep set of things. I can go, if you go to the Digital Doorway website, you should be able to see, I will put a link to this, but it will be all available. It is all available, all of those lunch and learns. If you just like can't get enough of us, and you just want to listen to us talk and talk and talk, you can always go and catch these. We are running our public programs. So those are all started. Jay just came. Jay, who's was out with us last week. The blacksmith shop is really prolific. There's so much stuff, iron stuff coming out of that. We actually using this exact same methodology in our one of the first 5 excavation units identified an archaeological feature. So we're really feeling really confident about this process and how it works. So if you haven't had an opportunity to sign up for a program, I definitely encourage you all, particularly the fall programs. We've still got slots open in the fall. Really encourage you all to come back out and dig with us. Otherwise, next in 2 weeks, the next lunch and learn is going to be Dr. Mary Furlong Minkoff with special guest. Goodness gracious, Barney Paveo Zuckerman, a professor at University of Maryland, who is a specialist in fauna materials, zooarchaeologist. She has worked with us for over a decade on working with our fauna material. So I'd really encourage you to tune in for that. It's going to be really a great presentation from the two of them about faunal materials. So another installment of the "Do You Know What This Is" series that Mary's been doing all year. So otherwise,
there was a
thank you, everyone. Oh, was there another question?
There was a question about what's next with the site. I don't know if you wanted to answer that.
Yeah, well, what's next is, for our department, it's looking for all the rest of these sites. For the overseer site, we need to finish the cataloging. We need to get the data analysis done on what we've done, write up the report, and then work with our stakeholders, the descendant committee, and get a series of research questions built that are going to help us investigate this site further and lead those questions. So, all right, thank you, everybody. Take care. We'll see you in a couple weeks, and particularly for those of you who are coming on an expedition in a couple weeks. And we're really excited to see you, and can't wait to see the rest of you. So take care.
Bye all.
Bye, y'all stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.